Chapter 1. The Frontier's Edge. The Final Expansion. The engineering of the fortress, defying the mud. While the emperor sits in his tent, the camp of Carnuntum around him is not merely a collection of tents. It is a temporary city built with the precision of a clock. To understand the emperor's isolation, one must appreciate the sheer effort required to keep the Roman world from sinking into the Germanic mud. Beyond the leather walls, the Roman engineers, the architecti, have performed miracles of geometry against the chaos of the storm. The camp is laid out in a perfect grid, a castrum that mirrors the order of the Roman mind. Even in the driving rain, the fossa, the great ditch, and the vallum, the earthen wall, hold firm. The engineers designed a sophisticated drainage system, a series of stone-lined channels that move the deluge away from the tents and toward the river. Marcus listens to the gurgle of the water in these channels. It is the sound of civilization's refusal to be washed away. He thinks of the surveying tool, the groma, which was used to set these lines. The groma represents the straight line, the path of virtue. Just as the engineers used the groma to impose a grid on the wild German forest, so does Marcus use Stoicism to impose a grid on the wild impulses of his own heart. The camp is a physical manifestation of his philosophy, a structured, fortified island in a sea of unguided nature. The ghosts of the academy, the echoes of the teachers. The cold settles deeper into the tent, and for a moment the emperor's mind wanders back 50 years. He is no longer at the edge of the world. He is a young boy in Rome, standing before his first great teacher, Junius Rusticus. He remembers the day Rusticus handed him a private copy of the lectures of Epictetus, a man who had once been a slave and now a master of the soul. Marcus recalls the smell of that old papyrus. It was the smell of freedom. In his memory, he sees the stoic face of Rusticus, a man who taught him that a king should not be a Caesar, but a man who happens to be a Caesar. Rusticus had warned him, "One day the world will call you master. On that day you must remember that you are a slave to your own duty." As the rain lashes against the leather papilio, Marcus feels the presence of these ghosts in the room. They sit with him in the shadows. He remembers Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, a man of such profound calm that nothing could shake him. Antoninus taught him to listen, how to stay at a task until it was finished, and how to be indifferent to the praise of the many. "I thank the gods for teachers who showed me that I did not need to be a rhetorician or a poet, but simply a man who does the right thing." These memories are his true warmth. They are the spiritual firewood that keeps the cold of the Danube from freezing his spirit. The ecology of the storm, the philosophy of a single drop. Marcus looks at a single bead of water that has managed to seep through a seam in the leather. It hangs for a moment, trembling, reflecting the golden light of his lamp before falling into the straw. He contemplates the journey of that drop. It was once part of the great ocean. It rose as mist. It traveled over the mountains of the north. It fell on a Roman tent, and now it returns to the earth to find its way back to the Danube. This is the panta rhei, the all things flow of the ancient Greeks. The universe is change. Life is what our thoughts make of it. He realizes that the Roman Empire is like that water drop. It is a massive, shimmering thing, full of light and power, but it is ultimately transient. One day, the Danube will flow past these banks, and there will be no Roman sentries. There will be no leather tents. The very language he speaks, the Latin of the legions and the Greek of the philosophers, will be a ghost. This thought does not make him sad, it makes him free. If the empire is temporary, then the only thing that matters is how he behaves now, in this fleeting second. The storm is not his enemy. The storm is the universe in motion. To be angry at the rain is as foolish as being angry at a stone for being hard. He embraces the storm. He accepts the wet air as a brother. By aligning his will with the nature of the storm, he ceases to be a victim of the weather and becomes part of it. The midnight inspection of the soul. The fourth watch is approaching, the coldest, darkest hour before the false dawn. This is the hour when the spirit is the most likely to break. Marcus closes his eyes and performs a mental inspection of his camp. He imagines walking through the rows of the triari, the veteran soldiers. He sees their weathered faces, their hands calloused by decades of holding the shield. He imagines the young tirones, the recruits, wide-eyed and terrified of the shadows. He sends them a silent message of strength. Then he performs an inspection of his own soul. Is there any anger left? He asks himself. Is there any vanity? Do I still desire the luxuries of Rome? He finds small pockets of resistance, a lingering desire for a warm bed, a slight resentment toward the Senate for their bickering. He systematically cleans these thoughts as a soldier cleans his gladius, his sword of rust. He uses the acid of truth to dissolve his ego. Thou art a little soul carrying a corpse, he reminds himself, quoting Epictetus. The corpse is his tired, aching body. The little soul is the spark of the divine. Tonight, at the frontier's edge, the spark is burning brighter than the body. The silence of the imperial seal. The work is finally complete. The night reports are signed, the philosophical reflections are captured, the ghosts of the teachers have been honored. Marcus takes his heavy signet ring, the seal of the emperor, and presses it into a pool of hot, red wax on the final scroll of the night. The thud of the seal is the final punctuation mark of the day. Outside, the rain has shifted into a fine, freezing mist. The world is perfectly quiet, save for the distant, mournful call of a mountain owl. Marcus blows out the lamp. The golden circle of light vanishes, and for a few minutes Marcus Aurelius sits in absolute, total darkness. In this darkness he is not the ruler of Rome. He is not a husband, a father, or a general. He is simply a consciousness, aware of its own existence, floating in the middle of a Germanic night. He feels the vastness of the world around him, the thousands of miles of forest, the millions of people sleeping, the stars hidden behind the clouds. He feels a profound sense of Ma'at. No, he feels the cosmos. He is exactly where he is supposed to be. The mud, the rain, the war, and the solitude, it is all part of a single, beautiful, and terrifying plan. Everything is fruit for me, O time, which thy seasons bring, O nature, he whispers. He lies back on his hard pallet, pulling the wolfskin over his chest. He closes his eyes as the first hint of gray light begins to touch the edges of the tent. Chapter 1 of his night is over. The frontier has been held, not just the border of the river, but the border of the human spirit.
Chapter 2. The Burden of the Purple. The rain continues its relentless assault on the leather canopy of the Papilio. But for Marcus Aurelius, the sound begins to fade into the background of a much deeper, much older memory. As he sits in the dim amber glow of his lamp, his mind drifts away from the mud of Germania and retreats toward the sun-drenched marble of Rome. He remembers a time before the war, before the plague, and before the weight of an empire settled upon his shoulders. He remembers the boy he once was, a boy who dreamed of the silence of a library, not the roar of a battlefield. This is the story of the burden of the purple, the transition of a quiet student of philosophy into the most powerful man on earth. It was a journey he never sought, yet a destiny he could not refuse. The Philosopher's Cloak, the early years. In his youth, Marcus was not a creature of the court. He was a creature of the mind. He remembers the scratchy, rough texture of the tribon, the simple, dark cloak worn by the Greek philosophers. At the age of 12, to the shock of his aristocratic family, the young Marcus began to dress as a Stoic. He insisted on sleeping on the hard, cold floor of his room, rejecting the feathered mattresses of the Roman elite. He sought a life of the soul's diet, a rigorous discipline of the body meant to free the mind. In those days, his world was measured in scrolls, not provinces. He remembers the smell of the old libraries, the scent of cedar oil used to preserve the papyrus, the dry dust of ancient knowledge, and the cool, silent shadows of the porticos. He walked the streets of Rome not as a prince, but as a student, his head bowed in contemplation of the works of Aristo and Heraclitus. He wanted to understand the nature of the universe. He had no desire to rule it. But the universe had other plans. Fate, the Stoics believe, is like a dog tied to a moving cart. The dog can either run willingly with the cart or be dragged. Marcus would soon learn that the cart of the Roman Empire was moving, and it was pulling him toward a throne he did not want. The most truthful, the eyes of Hadrian. The turning point came under the gaze of the Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian was a man of restless intellect, a wanderer who had seen every corner of the empire. He saw something in the young Marcus, a gravity, a sincerity that was rare among the sycophants of the Roman court. He gave Marcus a nickname that would stick for a lifetime, Verissimus, the most truthful. Hadrian realized that for the empire to survive, it needed a man who did not crave power. He engineered a complex chain of adoption. He adopted Antoninus Pius on the condition that Antoninus, in turn, adopt the young Marcus. In a single afternoon, the student was told that he was now the heir to the world. Marcus remembers the day the news was brought to him. He did not celebrate. He did not dream of gold or glory. Instead, he wept. He wept for the loss of his solitude. He wept for the simple life of a philosopher that was now being stripped away from him. He understood, even then, that the Tyrian purple, the rare, expensive dye of the emperor's robes, was not a garment of comfort. It was a shroud for the man he used to be. The tutelage between rhetoric and truth. The years that followed were a long, arduous preparation. Marcus was placed under the finest tutors in the world, most notably Marcus Cornelius Fronto, the master of Latin rhetoric. Fronto wanted Marcus to be a grand speaker, a man who could sway the Senate with flowery metaphors and clever wordplay. But Marcus's heart remained with Junius Rusticus, the Stoic who taught him that words were useless unless they led to right action. The burden of the purple began here, in the conflict between the image of a king and the reality of a man. He spent his days learning the art of the state, how to manage the grain supply, how to command the Praetorian Guard,
how to judge the complex legal disputes of 1,000,000 citizens. But at night, by the light of a flickering candle, much like the one on his desk now, he returned to his philosophy. He learned that to rule others, one must first be a master of oneself. He learned that the emperor is not the law of nature is the emperor. The death of Antoninus, the weight descends. In March of the year 161 AD, the transition was completed. His adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, was lying dying at the imperial villa in Lorium. He was the good emperor, a man of such profound calm that his final word to the centurion of the night watch was simply equanimitas, equanimity. When Antoninus breathed his last breath, the transition of power was immediate. The Praetorian Guard knelt, the Senate sent their messengers, the purple cloak was placed around Marcus's shoulders. It was a physical weight, heavy, and smelling of the sea snails from which the dye was extracted. In that moment, Marcus was the most powerful human being on the planet. He could have anything, do anything, destroy anyone. But the first thing he did was a move that shocked Rome. He insisted that his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, rule alongside him as a co-emperor. This was the burden of the purple shared. Marcus did not want to be a solitary titan. He understood that power is a poison, and the best way to dilute it is to share it. By giving Lucius equal power, Marcus proved that he was still the Verissimus Hadrian had seen decades ago. He was an emperor who practiced the philosophy of the common good. The reality of the throne, the noise of the world. Transitioning from a student to an emperor meant the death of silence. Rome was a city of 1,000,000 voices, and every one of them wanted something from the man in the purple robe. Marcus remembers the endless mornings in the tabularium, the noise of the petitioners, the bickering of the senators, the constant draining demands of the bureaucracy. He was no longer allowed to walk the streets in a simple cloak. He was preceded by 12 lictors carrying the fasces, the bundles of rods and axes that symbolized his power over life and death. He found that the purple was a barrier. People no longer spoke to him, they spoke to the office. They lied to him, flattered him, and feared him. The solitude he had cherished as a boy was gone, replaced by a crowded, noisy isolation. He was surrounded by people, yet he had never been more alone. It was during these years that he began to write the reflections that would become the meditations. They were his self-conversations, the only place where he could still be the student. He had to remind himself, "Take care that thou art not made into a Caesar, that thou art not dyed with this dye, for such things happen." He feared the purple would stain his soul, that the power would turn him into a tyrant. He fought every day to remain Marcus, even while being Caesar. The call of the frontier, the end of the Golden Age. For the first few years, the empire was at peace. It was the peak of the Pax Romana. But the universe, as Marcus knew, is a series of cycles. The Golden Age could not last. The transition to the war years began with reports from the north. The tribes were moving. The Danube was no longer a border, but a gateway. And then came the Antonine Plague, a devastating sickness brought back from the east by Lucius Verus's army. The streets of Rome grew quiet as the death toll mounted. The emperor could no longer stay in the city of marble. The burden of the purple now required him to leave the comfort of the palace and march into the mud of Germania. He had to trade the silk for leather, the library for the tent, and the silence of Rome for the reign of Germania. Conclusion. the student in the tent. As the rain drums against the leather canopy in the present moment, Marcus Aurelius adjusts the purple cloak around his shoulders. It is worn now, stained with the salt of his own sweat and the dust of a dozen battles. He realizes that the transition from student to emperor is never truly finished. Every day is a new transition. Every hour is a choice to either be a Caesar or to be a man. The burden of the purple is not the power to command others. It is the Chapter 3. The Inner Citadel. The rain has transitioned from a rhythmic drumming into a violent, chaotic roar, as if the very heavens over Germania are attempting to scour the Roman presence from the earth. Inside the Papilio, the air has grown colder, and the single flame of Marcus Aurelius's lamp dances precariously in the drafts that sneak through the stitched seams of the leather. Outside, the world is at war. Thousands of men lie in the mud, clutching their spears, waiting for a dawn that may bring only blood and iron. But inside the circle of amber light, there is a profound, almost supernatural stillness. This is the inner citadel. To the uninitiated, the emperor's calm might seem like coldness or exhaustion, but it is neither. It is a practiced, deliberate fortress of the mind. As Marcus dips his pen, he is not merely writing, he is reinforcing the walls of his soul. In this chapter of his long night, we go beneath the surface of the history and the purple robes to explore the mechanics of Stoic practice, the mental exercises that allow a man to remain unshaken while the pillars of the world are trembling. The foundation, the dichotomy of control. The first and most vital stone in the construction of the inner citadel is the dichotomy of control. Marcus looks at the reports on his desk, a fleet lost in a storm, a legion decimated by the plague, a betrayal by a trusted governor. To a normal man, these are catastrophes. To the Stoic Emperor, they are externals. He reminds himself of the core teaching of Epictetus. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. The weather, the movements of the Germanic tribes, the decisions of the Senate, and even the health of his own body are not within his ultimate control. Therefore, they are indifferent. They are the wind and the rain hitting the tent. He can choose to be frustrated by them, to weep over them, or to rail against the gods, but the rain will continue to fall. What is up to him? His judgment, his intention, his response. Marcus realizes that the war is not happening on the banks of the Danube. The real war is happening within his own mind. If he judges the loss of a legion as an evil, he suffers. If he judges it simply as an event to be managed with justice and courage, he remains at peace. The inner citadel is built on this single, liberating truth. No one can ever invade the sanctuary of your mind unless you leave the door open. The world can break his body, it can steal his throne, but it cannot force him to think a thought he does not wish to think. The view from above, the cosmic perspective. As the wind howls, Marcus performs a mental exercise he calls the view from above. He closes his eyes and imagines his spirit rising. First, he sees himself, a small, gray-haired man in a leather tent. Then he rises higher, seeing the entire camp of Carnuntum, a tiny grid of lights in a vast, dark forest. He rises further, seeing the serpentine coil of the Danube, then the entire province of Pannonia, then the sweep of the Roman Empire from the mist of Britain to the sands of Egypt. Finally, he rises until the earth itself is but a pale, spinning speck in the infinite blackness of the cosmos. From this height, the great war against the Marcomanni looks like a scuffle between ants over a morsel of food. The grand triumphs of Rome and the terrifying threats of the barbarians shrink into insignificance. He sees the millions of people who lived before him and the millions who will come after him, all of them chasing the same fleeting shadows. This exercise is the antidote to the ego. By seeing the world from the perspective of the stars, Marcus strips the events of the day of their emotional weight. The crisis that felt life-altering at noon becomes a mere footnote in the history of the universe by midnight. This is not a way to escape his duties, but a way to perform them without the paralyzing grip of anxiety. He returns to his desk not as a panicked victim of circumstance, but as a calm administrator of a small, temporary corner of existence. Premeditation malorum, dancing with the shadows. In the silence of the tent, Marcus practices premeditation malorum, the premeditation of evils. This is perhaps his most difficult discipline. He does not imagine best-case scenarios. Instead, he invites the shadows in. He imagines the morning. What if the messenger arrives to say the northern line has collapsed? What if his son, Commodus, is revealed to be a tyrant in the making? What if he, the emperor, dies in his sleep tonight? He plays these scenarios out in his mind, not to despair, but to drain them of their power to shock. Misfortune, he notes, is most heavy for those to whom it is unexpected. By meeting these evils in the safety of his mind before they happen in reality, he prepares his soul. He realizes that even in the worst-case scenario, he can still act with virtue. If he is to die, he can die with dignity. If he is to be betrayed, he can respond with forgiveness. By the time the lamp flickers low, he has already lived through a dozen defeats. When the sun rises, nothing the day brings can surprise him, for he has already mastered it in the darkness. The inner citadel is not built by ignoring the storm, but by becoming intimately familiar with every bolt of lightning. The inner fire, turning obstacles into fuel. Marcus looks at the dying embers in the brazier. He notes how when a small fire is smothered by a heavy log, it goes out. But a great fire consumes everything thrown into it. The more fuel you give it, the hotter and brighter it burns. This is his philosophy of amor fati, the love of fate. To the Stoic, an obstacle is not a hindrance, it is the path. If the war is difficult, it is an opportunity to practice endurance. If his generals are incompetent, it is an opportunity to practice patience. If the plague is ravaging his people, it is an opportunity to practice compassion and leadership. The impediment to action advances action, he writes. What stands in the way becomes the way. Inside the citadel, there is a spiritual furnace. Everything the world throws at Marcus, the rain, the war, the sickness, the loneliness, is cast into that furnace. He does not merely endure his fate, he loves it, because it is the very material out of which he carves his character. Without the war, he would not know if he was truly brave. Without the burden of the purple, he would not know if he was truly just. The storm is not trying to destroy the citadel. The storm is the very thing that proves the citadel is real. The practice of the present, the narrow path. Finally, Marcus practices the attention to the now. The mind, he realizes, loves to wander. It flees into the past to regret, or into the future to worry. But the past is a ghost, and the future is a dream. The only place where life actually exists, and the only place where virtue can be practiced, is the present moment. The sound of the rain is only happening now. The ink drying on the page is only happening now. His own breathing is only happening now. He realizes that no one loses a life of 80 years. They only lose the present moment, for that is all they ever possessed. By narrowing his focus to the immediate task at hand, signing this scroll, thinking this thought, enduring this breath, the The weight of the empire disappears. He does not have to carry the burden of the next 10 years. He only has to carry the burden of the next 10 seconds. The inner citadel is a fortress of the instant. Inside its walls, the future is a foreign country that he does not yet need to visit. He is here. He is awake. He is doing what a human being was born to do. Conclusion. The fortress is never finished. As the fourth watch begins and the first hint of gray light touches the wet leather of the tent, Marcus Aurelius sets down his pen. The inner citadel is not a physical place, and it is not a destination he has reached. It is a practice. Every hour of the night he has had to rebuild it, stone by stone, thought by thought. The world is still at war, the rain is still falling, the plague is still waiting, but the man in the tent is at peace, not because his problems have gone away, but because he has realized that the peace he sought was never in the absence of the storm, but in the strength of the citadel he built within it. He closes his eyes for a few minutes of rest, knowing that when he wakes, the war will resume. But he also knows that the fortress will hold. For the inner citadel is built of a material that no Roman legion and no Germanic tribe can ever destroy: the human will.
The rain outside the Papilio has slowed to a persistent, ghostly drizzle, but the atmosphere inside the tent has grown heavier, thicker, with a tension that no Stoic exercise can entirely dissolve. Marcus Aurelius sits motionless, his eyes fixed on a specific report at the edge of his desk. It is not a report of troop movements or of Germanic incursions. It is a tally of the dead. Not the dead of the battlefield, but the dead of the sick tent. This is the Antonine Plague, the great sickness that has followed the Roman legions like a vengeful shadow from the east. For years it has ravaged the empire, turning the bustling streets of Rome into silent graveyards and decimating the very army that stands between civilization and collapse. In this chapter of his long vigil, we witness the emperor facing the most terrifying enemy of his reign, an invisible killer that mocks the strength of Roman iron and the wisdom of Greek philosophy. The invisible invader, a fragile empire. To understand the weight on Marcus's heart, one must understand the scale of the devastation. Historians believe it was a strain of smallpox or measles brought back by the soldiers of Lucius Verus after the Parthian War. It moved with the efficiency of the Roman roads, spreading from the Persian Gulf to the Rhine. At its height, it was claimed that 2,000 people were dying in Rome every single day. As Marcus reads the names of the centurions and officers who have succumbed to the fever and the blackened pustules, he is struck by the profound fragility of the human empire. Rome, the eternal city, the master of the Mediterranean, the builder of roads that span continents, is being brought to its knees by an organism too small to see. He realizes that all the marble, all the gold, and all the military discipline are but a thin veneer over a terrifyingly vulnerable reality. The empire is not a solid, immortal entity. It is a collection of vessels of clay, each one easily broken, each one destined to return to the earth. The plague is the ultimate reminder of the Stoic truth: we are but dust and shadow. The stench of the camps, the sensory reality of death. The air inside the Papilio, usually filled with the scent of beeswax and old papyrus, now seems to carry the faint, sweet rot of the infirmaries. Even through the heavy leather of the tent, the sounds of the camp have changed. The rhythmic thud splash of the oars on the Danube has been replaced by the muffled rhythmic coughing of the men in the nearby barracks. In the silence, he hears the low, agonizing moans of the dying.
There is no glory in this death. There is no stoic end for a man whose lungs are filling with fluid and whose skin is a map of lesions. The emperor feels a deep visceral empathy for his men. He remembers the faces of soldiers he has decorated for bravery, men who stood unshaken against the Germanic spears, now weeping in their cots, begging for a mother or a wife who is thousands of miles away. He does not turn away from this suffering. To the Stoic, to look at the world as it is, no matter how ugly, is a fundamental duty. He hones his focus on the reality of the plague, using it as a memento mori, a reminder of his own mortality. He touches his own brow, checking for the heat of the fever. He knows that he is not exempt. The purple offers no immunity against the laws of nature. The leadership of the damned, Marcus as the physician king. How does a man lead when the very air is an enemy? Marcus Aurelius's response to the plague defines his greatness as a ruler. While others might have fled to their mountain villas, Marcus remained in the heart of the crisis. He took on the role of the physician king. He consulted with the great Dr. Galen, the most brilliant medical mind of the age, bringing him to the front lines. He organized the funerals of the poor in Rome at the state's expense, ensuring that the dead were treated with dignity. When the treasury ran dry due to the costs of the war and the plague, he did something unprecedented. He held a public auction of the imperial treasures. He sold the gold vessels, the crystal goblets, the silk robes of the empress, and even the jewels from the imperial crown. He told his people, "The emperor does not need gold when his children are starving and sick." Inside the tent, looking at his bare wooden desk, he feels no regret for the lost luxury. The gold was merely indifferent matter. The lives of his citizens were the true wealth of the empire. By selling his possessions, he was practicing what he preached, that a king is merely a servant of the common good. The Stoic response to loss, the death of Lucius Verus. The plague did not spare the imperial family. Marcus's co-emperor and adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, died of the sickness in 169 AD. Verus was Marcus's opposite, vibrant, fond of luxury and prone to excess, yet Marcus loved him. In the silence of the night, the ghost of Lucius seems to linger in the corners of the tent. Marcus remembers the long journey back to Rome with his brother's body, the heavy silence of the funeral procession, and the weight of the solitary throne that now rested entirely on him. How does a Stoic grieve? Marcus does not suppress his sadness. He acknowledges it, then places it within the context of the universe. Loss is nothing else than change, and change is nature's delight, he writes. He realizes that Lucius has simply returned his breath to the source. To be angry that a loved one has died is as irrational as being angry that the sun has set. They were a gift from the universe for a short time, and now the universe has called for the gift to be returned. This perspective does not make the loss less painful, but it makes it bearable. It allows the emperor to continue his work without being paralyzed by his own mourning. The fragility of the mind, fighting the fear. The greatest threat of the plague was not just the physical death, but the spiritual contagion of fear. Panic was spreading through the empire faster than the sickness. People were turning to superstition, to strange cults, and to the persecution of outsiders to appease the angry gods. Inside the Papilio, Marcus fights the plague of the mind. He realizes that fear is a choice. The destruction of the mind is a far greater plague than any pestilence which affects the air, for the one is a pestilence of animals, but the other is a pestilence of men. He uses his journals to remind himself to remain rational. He refuses to blame the gods or to seek scapegoats. He focuses on the hekao, the words of power, which for him are the logical truths of philosophy. He speaks to his soldiers, his voice a baritone of steady, unshakable calm, telling them that death is natural, but cowardice is a betrayal of the soul. His presence is the inner citadel made manifest for 20,000 terrified men. The cosmic cycle, life after the storm. As the rain outside turns into a cold mist, Marcus reflects on the grand cycle of history. He thinks of the great empires of the past, Egypt, Babylon, Troy, all of which were brought low by time, war, and disease. He realizes that the Antonine Plague is merely another turn of the wheel. The human empire is a fragile thing, yes, but life itself is resilient. He thinks of the farmers who will sow their crops once the plague has passed, the children who will be born into a world he will never see, and the grass that will eventually grow over the very spot where his tent stands tonight. This realization brings him a profound sense of equanimity. He is part of a vast, unfolding drama that is much larger than his own life or even the life of Rome. He is a soldier on the front line of existence, and his duty is to hold his post until his own change comes. He writes one last thought for the night. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. He has lived, he has served, he has endured. As the shadow of the plague hangs over the world, the emperor remains the watchman of the night, waiting for a dawn that he knows will eventually come, whether he is there to see it.
Chapter 5. The Ghost of Antoninus. The rain has shifted once more, turning from a heavy deluge into a fine, freezing mist that clings to the leather of the papilio like a shroud. Inside, the brazier has settled into a collection of glowing orange eyes, casting long, wavering shadows that dance across the stacks of reports and philosophical scrolls. Marcus Aurelius pulls his wolfskin cloak tighter. His bones ache with a damp cold that no fire can truly reach. But it is not the physical chill that occupies his mind tonight. It is a memory. A ghost. In the silence of the Germanic night, the image of his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, emerges from the shadows. Antoninus was the man who held the world together for 23 years without once leading an army into battle, without once leaving the soil of Italy, and without once losing his temper. He was the good man on the throne, the saint of the Roman world. As Marcus sits in the mud of the frontier, he feels the crushing weight of that legacy. To be an emperor is difficult. To be the successor to a man like Antoninus is a burden that transcends the politics of Rome. The Portrait of Equanimity. Marcus closes his eyes and sees him. Antoninus, sitting in the gardens of the villa at Lorium. He remembers the man's face, not the stern marble features of the imperial busts, but a face of profound, unshakable calm. Antoninus was a man of equanimitas, a word that would become his final password to the Praetorian Guard. In his journals, Marcus has meticulously listed the virtues of his father, a spiritual inventory he consults when his own patience wears thin. He remembers Antoninus's lack of vanity. Most emperors lived for the applause of the circus and the adulation of the Senate, but Antoninus was indifferent to such trivialities. He did not seek out new titles or grand monuments. He was content to be a servant of the state, a shepherd of the people, who found more joy in the harvest of his private vineyards than in the triumphs of the city. He was always the same,
Marcus whispers to the darkness, consistent, reasonable, unswayed by the gusts of popular opinion. In the tent, Marcus reflects on the sheer simplicity of his father's goodness. Antoninus didn't need a complex system of logic to be virtuous. He was virtuous by nature. For Marcus, the student, virtue is a daily struggle, a wall he must rebuild every hour. For Antoninus, virtue was the air he breathed. This is the ghost that haunts Marcus, the fear that he is merely a man pretending to be good, while his father was the thing itself. The contrast of the ages, gold versus iron. The ghost of Antoninus represents a lost world, a golden age that Marcus was destined to end. Antoninus ruled during the Pax Romana at its most serene. The borders were quiet, the treasury was full, and the plague was a story from the ancient past. He died in a warm bed, surrounded by family, with the sun setting over the Italian hills. Marcus, however, has been cast into an age of iron and rust. He looks at his hands, stained with the ink of war and the dust of the camps. He realizes that his reign will be remembered for the sound of the trumpet, not the song of the harvest. There is a lingering, unspoken question in the heart of the emperor. Would Antoninus have been so good if he had been forced to stand in this mud? It is easy to be a saint in a garden. It is far harder to be one in a trench. Marcus feels a sharp pang of loneliness. He is the first emperor in a century who has had to prove his philosophy in the face of total collapse. He worries that the goodness of the previous generation was a luxury of peace, and that he, Marcus, is being forced to become something harder, something more ruthless, to save the very civilization Antoninus left him. The weight of being a good man. The burden of the purple is often described as the weight of power, but for Marcus it is the weight of moral expectation. To be a good man in a position of absolute power is a paradox that tears at the soul. He remembers a moment years ago when a courtier suggested he execute a rebel who had plotted against the throne. Antoninus would have forgiven the man with a gentle smile, viewing the betrayal as a misunderstanding. But Marcus, standing at the edge of a dramatic forest with 20,000 lives at stake, feels the cold necessity of the law. If he is too merciful, he invites chaos. If he is too harsh, he becomes a tyrant. How do you remain a good man when your signature sends men to their deaths? How do you maintain a soft heart when you must have an iron will? He turns to the memory of his father's patience. Antoninus never rushed a decision. He would listen to the bickering of the senators for hours, never showing a flicker of irritation. He treated the lowliest clerk with the same dignity as a consul. Marcus tries to emulate this. Even tonight, in the rain, he has spent hours reviewing the petitions of common soldiers, searching for the just path in a world of gray shadows. Be like Antoninus, he reminds himself. Limit thy desires. Be satisfied with little. Work with thy own hands. Do not be hurried. The final word, equanimitas. The memory of his father's death is the most vivid ghost of all. Marcus was there in the room at Laurium when the 80-year-old emperor realized the end had come. There was no panic, no clinging to life. Antoninus simply transferred the golden statue of fortune to Marcus's bedroom, signaling the change of power. When the centurion of the night watch came to ask for the password, Antoninus looked at him with clear, untroubled eyes and said, "Equanimitas." Then he turned over and died as peacefully as a child falling asleep. To Marcus, that single word is the ultimate challenge. It is the goal of the inner citadel. It means more than calm. It means an equal mind, a mind that treats success and failure, life and death as the same. As the rain drums on the tent, Marcus realizes that he has not yet achieved his father's level of equanimity. He still feels the sting of the cold. He still feels the ache of the war. He still feels the fear of the plague. The solitude of the standard. Being the son of a saint creates a specific kind of solitude. There is no one Marcus can talk to about the pressure of this moral standard. To the world, he is the emperor, the highest authority. But to himself, he is always the son, looking up at the towering shadow of a man who was better than he is. He reflects on the nature of virtue. Perhaps, he thinks, the struggle is the point. Perhaps the goodness of Antoninus was a gift of the gods, while the goodness of Marcus must be a conquest of the will. If he can stay just while being surrounded by injustice, if he can stay kind while being surrounded by cruelty, then perhaps he will have honored the ghost of his father in the only way that matters. The best way of avenging thyself, he writes, the pen moving with a slow, deliberate grace, is not to become like the wrongdoer. He will not become like the barbarians he fights. He will not become like the corrupt senators he manages. He will stay a good man, even if it kills him, especially if it kills him. Conclusion: the lamp and the legacy. The oil in the lamp is dangerously low. The flame is a tiny blue and gold point of light fighting against the encroaching dark. Marcus Aurelius looks at the shadow of his own hand on the papyrus. It is a thin, wrinkled hand, the hand of an old man who has carried the world for too long. He realizes that Antoninus is no longer a man to be envied, but a standard to be held. The ghost of Antoninus is not there to mock him, but to guide him. The Golden Age is gone, and Marcus is the watchman of the Iron Age. His father provided the peace. Marcus must provide the endurance. He feels a strange, quiet surge of gratitude. He was lucky to have seen a good man in the flesh. Most men only read about virtue in books, but Marcus lived with it. He saw it eat. He saw it sleep. He saw it die. This experience is his true treasury, more valuable than all the gold he auctioned to save the city. The rain has stopped. A profound, heavy silence has settled over the camp of Carnuntum. Marcus Aurelius sets down his pen. He has made his peace with the ghost. He will sleep now on his...
Chapter 6. The Night Watch. The hour is 3 in the morning, the tertia vigilia, the deep heart of the third watch. In the Roman military mind, this is the hour of maximum peril, the time when the human spirit is at its lowest ebb and the shadows are at their most deceptive. Outside the Papilio, the rain has finally ceased, leaving behind a world of dripping silver and bone-chilling mist. The silence that follows a long storm is not a peaceful one. It is heavy, expectant, and thick with the damp smell of the earth and the river. Inside the emperor's tent, Marcus Aurelius has set down his pen. His fingers are cramped, and the oil in his lamp has dwindled to a tiny, flickering sapphire point. He does not seek sleep yet. Instead, he sits in absolute stillness, his senses expanding outward beyond the leather walls. In this chapter of his long night, we leave the realm of philosophy and memory to immerse ourselves in the physical reality of the camp. This is the mechanical heart of the empire at rest, a symphony of small sounds and the terrifying, beautiful silence of a man who commands it all. The metal and the mist, the sounds of the perimeter. Marcus closes his eyes, and the camp of Carnuntum begins to speak to him.
The first sound he hears is the distant rhythmic clank-clank of metal on metal. It is the sound of a centurion walking the wooden palisade, his lorica segmentata, plate armor, shifting with every step. To the emperor, this is the sound of security. It is the steady heartbeat of the legion, a reminder that even while the world sleeps, the iron wall of Rome remains awake. From the direction of the stables, a horse neighs, a sharp, lonely sound that cuts through the mist. It is answered by the low, guttural grunt of a camel brought from the Syrian frontiers, a reminder of the vast, multicultural reach of his army. These animals are as much a part of the Roman machine as the men, shivering in their stalls, their breath rising in white plumes that vanish into the dark. Then there is the sound of the sentries calling out the watch, omnia recta, all is right. The phrase travels from tower to tower, a wave of human voices that circles the perimeter of the camp. It is a fragile sound against the vast, silent darkness of the Germanic forest beyond the walls, a small assertion of human order in a wilderness that knows no laws. The life of the tent, the micro-sounds of solitude. Within the tent itself, the silence is not empty, it is layered. There is the slow, rhythmic drip-drip of water falling from a saturated leather seam into a bronze basin, a natural water clock marking the seconds of the emperor's life. There is the soft, settling hiss of the charcoal in the brazier, the dying embers shifting as they turn to gray ash. Marcus hears his own breathing, a slightly labored sound that reminds him of his mortality. In the total quiet, he can hear the infinitesimal scritch of a beetle moving across the straw floor. To the most powerful man on earth, these tiny sounds are grounding. They remind him that he is part of a physical world that operates independently of his decrees. The beetle does not know he is Caesar. The charcoal burns according to the laws of heat, not the laws of Rome. In the silence of the tent, Marcus finds the stoic humility of being just another organism in the vast ecology of the night. The ghostly echoes, the presence of 20,000. Although he is alone in his tent, he is acutely aware of the 20,000 souls sleeping around him. The camp is a massive, living organism held in a state of suspended animation. He can almost feel the collective heat of the men huddling in their contubernia, the thousands of lungs drawing in the cold air, the thousands of hearts beating in unison. He thinks of the young recruits, the tirones, many of whom are likely lying awake, staring at the dark leather above them, terrified of the battle that might come at dawn. He thinks of the veterans, the triares, who sleep with the heavy, dreamless sleep of men who have seen everything and fear nothing. The emperor feels a profound paternal responsibility for this silence. It is his job to ensure that these men can sleep. His wakefulness is the price of their rest. This is the solitude of the standard. The silence in the emperor's tent is the eye of the storm. Around him is the potential energy of a war machine, ready to ignite on the sound of a trumpet. But here, in the center, there is only a man, a lamp, and a profound, echoing stillness. The engineering of the dark. Marcus reflects on the physical construction of this silence. The Romans did not just build camps, they built fortresses of the mind. The camp is laid out in a perfect grid, the Via Praetoria and the Via Principalis crossing at right angles. This geometry is a silent prayer to order. He imagines the watchers of the hour at the water clock, their eyes fixed on the rising float. He imagines the engineers who, even now, might be sharpening tools or repairing ballista in the shadows. The physical reality of the camp is about preparedness. Everything is in its place. The shields are stacked, the spears are upright, the grain is measured. This physical order is what allows Marcus to find his internal order. He knows that if the camp were in chaos, his mind would be in chaos. The silence of the tent is a luxury bought by the discipline of the legion. The midnight reflection, the mirror of the Danube. As the mist grows thicker, the sound of the river, the Danube, becomes more pronounced. It is a low, constant roar, a primal sound that predates Rome and will outlast it. To Marcus, the river is the ultimate physical reality. It is the boundary. Beyond it lies the barbaricum, the unknown. On this side lies the imperium, the known. But in the 3 a.m. silence, he realizes the boundary is an illusion. The water of the river flows past both sides equally. The wind that chills the Germanic tribesman is the same wind that chills the Roman emperor. He feels a sense of cosmic solitude. He is the watchman on the edge of the world. He is the one who sits in the silence so that the world can speak to him. In this hour, he does not feel like a ruler. He feels like a witness. He is witnessing the night, witnessing the river, witnessing the slow, inexorable turning of the great wheel of the universe. The transition to the fourth watch. A new sound breaks the silence, the sharp, clear note of a bucina, trumpet, from the center of the camp. It is the signal for the transition to the quarta vigilia, the final watch before the dawn. The silence of the tent is broken. Marcus hears the shuffling of feet as the new sentries take their posts. He hears the low commands of the decurones. The camp is beginning to stir, like a great beast waking from a deep slumber. The physical reality of the day is returning. The emperor picks up his pen one last time for the night. He does not write a decree. He writes a simple observation of the silence he has just experienced. The soul is dyed by the color of its thoughts. Think on these things: the silence, the river, the watchman. Conclusion: the fortress of the moment. Chapter 6 is the chapter of the body. It is the moment when Marcus Aurelius stops being a philosopher and starts being a creature of the earth. He has heard the metal, smelled the mist, and felt the silence. He has checked the physical walls of his empire and found them standing. As he prepares for the final hour of his vigil, he realizes that the silence of the tent was not a void to be filled, but a sanctuary to be cherished. It was the only time in the 24 hours of his day when he could truly hear the universe. The lamp finally goes out. The sapphire flame vanishes into a wisp of gray smoke. Marcus sits in the absolute dark, listening to the first birds of the Germanic forest beginning to chirp in the distance. The night watch is almost over. The final breath of the night is coming.
The sapphire point of the lamp has finally surrendered to the dark, and a thin, wispy trail of gray smoke rises from the wick, vanishing into the rafters of the papilio. Beyond the leather walls, the world is no longer black. It has shifted into a ghostly pre-dawn indigo. The quarta vigilia, the fourth and final watch, is drawing to its close. In this hour, the Germanic mist is at its thickest, clinging to the ground like the breath of the earth itself. Marcus Aurelius sits in the absolute darkness. He does not reach for another flask of oil. He does not call for a servant to relight the flame. He sits in the inner citadel of his own making, feeling the slow, heavy pulse of his own heart. In this final chapter of our journey, we witness the emperor's meditation on the end. This is the final breath, not just of the night, but a contemplation of the ultimate transition. Death, the legacy of a name, and the Stoic concept of the eternal return. The looming shadow, death as a natural act. In the silence, Marcus reflects on the physical fragility he has felt throughout the night. At 59, in a world where the average life is short and brutal, he knows he is an old man.
The plague, the wars, and the unrelenting damp of the Danube have hollowed him out. He does not fear this. To the Stoic, fearing death is as irrational as fearing the arrival of autumn or the setting of the sun. Death, he thinks, is a function of nature, and if anyone is afraid of a function of nature, he is a child. He imagines his own body as a suit of armor that has served its purpose and is now being returned to the forge. He is not losing his life, he is merely giving back the borrowed elements, the carbon, the water, the breath, to the universe that provided them. He views death not as an ending, but as a dissolution. Just as the rain on the tent will eventually find its way back to the sea, so too will his consciousness find its way back to the Logos, the great rational fire of the cosmos. The vanity of the name, the illusion of legacy. As the light in the east grows from indigo to a pale, bruised violet, Marcus turns his mind to the concept of legacy. For decades, the world has whispered his name with awe. His image is stamped on millions of coins. His statues stand in every forum from Londinium to Antioch. How many people who once knew my name are now forgotten, he asks himself, and how many who praise me now will soon be dead themselves? He realizes that posthumous fame is an empty vessel. To be remembered by people who have not yet been born is no different than being remembered by people who lived 1,000 years ago. It is a thing outside of his control, and therefore it is indifferent. He thinks of the great emperors before him, Augustus, Trajan, and his beloved father, Antoninus. Their names are still spoken, but the men they were are gone. Their private jokes, their secret fears, the way they laughed, all of it has been swallowed by time. If he is remembered as a good emperor, that is a benefit for the state, but it adds nothing to the soul of Marcus himself. The only legacy that matters is the ma'at, the justice he practiced in this very moment. A man's life is not measured by the length of his shadow in history, but by the uprightness of his character in the present. The eternal return, the great cycle of time. The emperor contemplates one of the most profound and challenging ideas of his philosophy, the eternal return. The Stoics believed that the universe moves in vast identical cycles. After a great conflagration, the world begins anew, and every event, every person, and every rainy night in a Germanic tent is repeated exactly as it was. Marcus looks at the desk where he spent the night writing. He thinks, I have sat here before. I have written these words before, and I will sit here again. This idea, which could drive a lesser man to despair, brings Marcus a sense of cosmic relief. It means that nothing is ever truly lost. It means that his struggle to be a good man is not a one-time performance, but a permanent part of the fabric of reality. He is a soldier in an eternal army, fighting a battle that is always won and always lost. This cycle removes the sting of the end. If the play is performed over and over again, it doesn't matter when the curtain falls on his specific part. The play continues. The universe remains. The world awakens. The return to duty. A sudden, sharp sound breaks the silence, the clatter of a shield falling in the nearby barracks. A horse neighs. The low, melodic chanting of the watchers of the hour begins as they perform the morning lustration. The geography of shadows is being burned away by the rising sun. Marcus Aurelius stands up. His joints crack with a sound like dry twigs, and his head swims for a moment as the blood moves through his tired veins. He walks to the entrance of his tent and pulls back the heavy leather flap. The world that meets him is transformed. The rain has stopped completely. The Germanic forest is draped in a thick, silver-white fog that makes the trees look like the pillars of a ghostly cathedral. The air is cold enough to bite, but it is fresh, tasting of ozone and pine. At the horizon, a sliver of electric gold breaks through the gray. The first ray of the sun hits the mud of the camp, turning the puddles into mirrors of fire. The final instruction. A young centurion, his face flushed with the cold, approaches the emperor's tent. He stops, surprised to see the master of the world standing there alone, without guards, dressed in a worn wool cloak. The soldier salutes, the iron of his bracers clashing. Imperator, the centurion says, his breath a white cloud. The morning report is ready. The tribes are quiet. The sun has risen. Marcus looks at the young man, his bright eyes, his skin that has not yet been marked by the plague, his life that is still full of the future. The emperor feels a profound paternal love. He does not see a subordinate. He sees a fellow traveler on the river of time. "Good," Marcus replies. His voice is a low, steady baritone, thickened by the night's silence, but clear as a bell. "Go to your breakfast, be kind to your men, and remember." He pauses, looking out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the Danube. This day is a gift. It has never happened before, and it will never happen again in quite this way. Live it as if you were on a mountain. Conclusion. The rest of the Stoic. The centurion bows and departs, puzzled but comforted by the emperor's calm. Marcus Aurelius remains at the entrance of his tent for a few minutes more. He watches the camp come to life, the smoke rising from the cooking fires, the banners of the legions being unfurled, the sounds of 20,000 men preparing for another day of empire. He has survived the night. He has faced the shadow of the plague. He has conversed with the ghost of Antoninus. He has reinforced the inner citadel. The sailing with the pharaohs was a journey of gold and stars. The vigil of the emperor was a journey of iron and rain. But both lead to the same destination, the realization that the universe is a single, interconnected whole, and that our only job is to play our part with dignity until the final breath takes us home. Marcus Aurelius turns back into the shadows of his tent to dress for the day's council. The night is over. The burden of the purple beckons once more. But as he steps into the light of the new day, he carries the silence of the tent with him. He is at peace. The sun has risen, the river flows, and for one more day, the world is held together by the steady, unshakable will of a man who is no longer afraid to die.